The overnight flight from Chicago to London carried 243 passengers through the darkness above the Atlantic Ocean. Most of them slept beneath thin airline blankets, their faces lit blue by the glow of seatback screens playing movies no one was watching. In seat 8A, a black man in a rumpled gray sweater dozed with his head against the cold oval window, his reflection a ghost against the endless night sky beyond. No one noticed him. No one looked twice. He was just another tired traveler, invisible in the quiet hum of 37,000 feet above the black water below. Then, the captain's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, urgent and unmistakable. If anyone on board had combat flight experience, they needed to identify themselves to the crew immediately. The cabin stirred, heads lifted from pillows. Eyes darted nervously. The man in seat 8A opened his eyes. His name was Marcus Cole. He was 38 years old, a software engineer for a logistics company headquartered in downtown Chicago. His apartment was a modest two-bedroom in Rogers Park, small but clean, with a view of the elevated train tracks that rattled past every 15 minutes throughout the night. The rent was $1,800 a month, and he paid it on time, every single time, because that was what responsible fathers did. His daughter Zoe was 7 years old. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she believed with absolute certainty that her daddy could fix anything in the entire world. A broken bicycle chain, a math problem about fractions that made no sense to her. The way her heart hurt sometimes when she thought about her mother, who had died in a car accident when Zoe was only 3. Marcus had built his entire life around that little girl. Every decision he made, every sacrifice, every quiet compromise traced directly back to her. He took the job at the logistics company because it offered stability and comprehensive health insurance. He turned down the promotion that would have required 70-hour weeks and constant travel. He scheduled his business trips only when absolutely necessary. And even then, he called her every single night before bedtime without fail. Tonight, before boarding at O'Hare International Airport, he had recorded a voice message for her to wake up to in the morning. "Hey, baby girl, Daddy's on the plane now. I'll be home in 2 days, okay? You be good for Grandma. I love you bigger than the sky." She always laughed at that phrase. Bigger than the sky. It had started when she was 4 years old, when she asked him how much he loved her, and he had pointed up at the endless blue above them and said those exact words. Now it was their special thing, their secret language, their way of saying everything that truly mattered between them. He had been thinking about her face when he fell asleep somewhere over Newfoundland. Now, with the captain's urgent announcement still echoing through the cabin, he thought about her again. She was the reason he had left the United States Air Force 8 years ago. She was the reason he had given up everything he loved about flying. It had not been an easy decision. He had loved flying more than he had ever loved anything in his life, except for her. The F-16 Fighting Falcon had been his cathedral, the cramped cockpit his confession booth, the endless sky his only true religion. He had logged over 1,500 hours in combat aircraft, had flown dangerous missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for a night extraction mission that still appeared in his dreams. But then Sarah died. A car accident on an icy highway in December. Sudden and final. The phone call came at 3 a.m, and by sunrise, everything he knew had collapsed. Suddenly, he was a single father with a 3-year-old daughter who kept asking when Mommy was coming home, and a military career that sent him halfway around the world for months at a time. He could not be both things anymore. He could not be a warrior and a father, so he made his choice. He remembered the day he told Zoe he was leaving the Air Force, even though she was far too young to understand. He had held her in his lap in their small living room and told her that Daddy was not going to fly the big planes anymore. Daddy was going to stay home with her instead. She had looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, her mother's eyes, and asked him why. Did he not like the sky anymore? He had felt something break inside his chest, some essential piece of himself that he carefully buried and never looked at again. "I like you more," he had told her. "I like you more than anything in the whole world." Now, on this commercial aircraft, surrounded by strangers who looked through him like he was made of glass, that buried piece stirred. A flight attendant hurried past his row, her face pale beneath professional composure. A businessman across the aisle gripped his armrest with white knuckles. Somewhere behind him, an elderly woman whispered a prayer in Spanish. Marcus looked out the window at the impenetrable darkness beyond. Then he looked at his phone, at the last photograph he had taken of Zoe, her gap-toothed grin bright against the backdrop of their small kitchen. He had promised her he would come home safely. He had promised. The captain's voice returned through the speakers, more strained and urgent this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to be more specific about our situation. We have experienced a critical malfunction in our flight control systems. If anyone on board has experienced flying aircraft manually, particularly in military or combat aviation, we need you to make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately. Time is of the essence." The words hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke. Around Marcus, passengers began to shift and murmur anxiously, their earlier drowsiness replaced by the sharp edge of genuine fear. A baby started crying somewhere in the back of the aircraft. A man in first class stood up and looked around the cabin, clearly expecting someone else to volunteer first. Marcus felt his heart rate climb steadily. He recognized exactly what the captain was describing, the careful phrasing designed to minimize panic while communicating the gravity of the situation. A critical malfunction in flight control systems. Manual flying required. Combat experience preferred. This was not a simple hydraulic leak or a minor autopilot malfunction. This was the kind of cascading system failure that killed experienced pilots and their passengers. He had seen it happen once before, during his second deployment to the Middle East. An F-16 had gone down over the Iraqi desert, its pilot unable to recover from a catastrophic system failure that stripped away every safety net, every backup, every margin for error. The wreckage had scattered across 3 miles of sand dunes. They never found all the pieces of the aircraft. They never found all the pieces of the pilot. The memory rose unbidden, and with it came the cold, analytical clarity that had once made him one of the best pilots in his squadron. His mind began to catalog the possibilities automatically. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner, based on the cabin configuration and window shape. A fly-by-wire flight control system, meaning all controls were entirely electronic with no direct mechanical linkage between the pilot's inputs and the aircraft's control surfaces. If the flight computers failed, if the redundant systems cascaded, this plane would become a 200-ton brick falling through the sky toward the black ocean below. But there were manual override systems. There were always manual overrides, if you knew exactly where to find them, if you had the training to use them, if you could keep your hands steady while the world fell apart around you. He knew where to find them. A white man in his 50s stood up 3 rows ahead of Marcus, waving his hand enthusiastically like a schoolboy seeking the teacher's attention. He announced loudly that he was a pilot, a private pilot specifically. He had his license and everything. A flight attendant hurried toward him, relief flickering across her face.